Hi.
So I'll be live streaming the conversation on Facebook.
Great. Yeah, I caught the last few minutes, and I gotta say, it always makes me nervous to see how things go, especially like virtually, and then there might be technical difficulties. I did see some delay in visuals and audio, but I think hopefully the story still resonates, or at least people were able to really experience the story.
Yeah, I do hope so. Actually, I had asked in case if that's the case. I wonder whether other people also face the same difficulty. But yes, it was a wonderful film. Thank you so much for allowing us to watch such an interesting film.
And thank you
Uh,
for having me.
yeah, yeah. And quite many themes actually covered in this film. It was quite heavy for me
Mm,
as a person who has been in the mental health sector as well.
yeah.
And yeah, yeah, yeah. Just to begin the discussion, Nicola, what inspired you to do this film?
Um, there was two elements. For me, on a personal level, I've always wanted to visualize the mind space. I feel, apart from the realities that we face, the external stimulation that we often experience that comes from outside forces, I, I've always felt what also encompasses one's reality is also what goes on in our head. How we make decisions and the feelings that we have to digest and reflect upon. That's something I've always wanted to visualize, basically our mind space, particularly in a moment when we're going through something traumatic or even something that's very sudden, as in, something unexpected, and all of a sudden you're thrown into the situation or something is thrown at you. And how do you then uh, understand it and act on it. So that process from receiving the information to going through it in your head and then projecting it into as an action, all of that it goes through in your head. And I feel that's something we as filmmakers, or maybe even visually, we don't often get to see it. We feel it, but we don't see it. And I've always wanted to visualize these feelings. So that was the intention in doing this piece. Um, what also inspired this particular story is actually a real incident that happened to my friend. Long story short, he's my age, but he lost his mother when we were in college. So at the time, he was only like 20. We weren't even done with college, and I knew him as someone who was very extroverted. Like he's always, in the front center of a party, and he's always very, talkative, and he's always had a lot of friends around him. So he's a very extroverted guy. But of course, when this happened, and it wasn't something he expected, and overnight, he practically changed like 360. He went from always going out to completely becoming a hermit, to the point where we lost touch, we lost contact as well. And I really didn't speak to him for like almost 10 years. I knew, like, he shared to me bits and pieces what happened. And then next thing I know, he basically retreated into his own space. And, he never reached out. And then at the same time, when I was younger, I also was a little bit intimidated to reach out. I wasn't sure if I'm being too imposing or whatnot, or even knew how to approach such a heavy situation in his family, right? Um, but I was, and then in recent years, like when I was working on Daffodil, I can't get his story out of my head. What he had to go through. And so I took up the courage to actually reach out to him again and was like, look, I'm hoping to do this story, and I can't get your incident out of my head. So is it okay if I could ask you a little bit more about what you went through, what happened there, or how did you handle it really? Um, And one of the bigger things, and one of the biggest realization I learned from him is that, so he is a family of him as the brother, youngest brother. He has an older sister, and then it was mom, and then the dad. Uh, you know, it was a like his parents were divorced like around when he was in middle school or something. So he's always been, his family has been separated. But what was you know, kind of shocking to me is after what happened when the mom passed away, apparently he never talked to his dad or sister about it. If anything, they kind of just swept it under the rug. Of course, they dealt with all the logistics and all of that, cleaning out the house or whatnot. But in terms of actually having a conversation amongst themselves as a family, they never actually had the chance to check in with each other. Like, how is the sister dealing? How is he himself, my friend, dealing? Or how is this affecting the father? None of them, amongst the three of them, really check in with each other. I believe, obviously, all three of them have to go through the grief on their own. It's oftentimes hard to even communicate the feelings that's bottled inside or that's still ongoing. So they each actually just dealt with it on their own. My friend went to see a therapist. And eventually he also is still now helping out with a suicidal prevention center in Hong Kong. So at least he's gotten professional help and yeah, support. So at least that's how he dealt with it. And at least so far it's been doing him good. And he's married now, and he has his family values, and it's from, if anything, that has also shaped his family values. And I'm sure he has reflected upon what could have been better, and now what does he want for his own family. So it's definitely helped him grow and process and progress onwards. So it's again, it's never an overnight like fix, but it's ongoing in his, I'm sure, throughout his life. But at least day by day, he's handling it and recognizing the kind of patterns or how to move forward. So those were the two main elements that inspired this short film.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that with us as well, Nicola. I was quite captivated by the visuals, especially the way that you have tried to recreate the memory tree and being able to look at those memories on the leaf of that
Yeah,
tree. Yeah. Uh,
yeah, sorry.
yeah. No, no, continue.
Uh, oh, I was just going to add that thank you for bringing that up, because personally, I've also experienced a loss. And I remember when I hear the news, when I hear the sudden news, all of a sudden in my memory, I would suddenly recall right away the last time I spoke to this person, where we were, what were we talking about. All of a sudden that became very prominent, even though it's something I don't think about otherwise on day-to-day basis. Like if anything, it's probably just shoved into a corner, or it just gets hidden away. But when I have experienced like uh, losing someone, and I was quite intriguing for me to suddenly like see all these memories from the most recent to trailing back to the earlier days. But yeah, and so I wanted to capture that. So I'm glad you brought that up, because that was something I wanted to visualize and express. Maybe not very straightforwardly, but at least that was something I've experienced. And so I wanted to kind of bring forth it onto this piece.
Yeah, yeah, and I really, what caught my attention was the use of the color purple a lot, and I didn't know whether you thought of it, but it's the color of the mental health awareness ribbon, and it just like brings your attention to the fabulosity of the colors, the color schemes, how much of that impacts one's mental health, one's expression of their mental health issues as well.
Mm,
Um, yeah, yeah. Other theme that struck me was the expression of grief, as you said, like how um, there needs to be a culture of being able to express grief. And the initial scene wherein the protagonist is so busy with her work or so
Yes.
occupied with the way that she orders things on her desk, etc.
Hmm.
It just like reminded me of a culture wherein like you don't have time to feel the grief, have time to feel anything rather. And yeah, yeah. What do you think about that?
Yes, so I've definitely learned there's a cultural difference when it comes to dealing with mental health. And I start to see why. For example, like I think this whole conversation even started only around like in the US or like Western countries, and not so much in Asia yet. And what I've learned is there is a disparity between the old and new generation. Like there's a gap between the old and new generation in how they treat this as a as a something that's part of the human experience. So I think my experience as a Chinese too, um, for example, like my grandma actually smuggled into China from China into Hong Kong, and she had to like start things from scratch. Like there wasn't much time to think about how she's not feeling happy or that she's a bit upset that things are so in such a rush. Like it was all about do. You know, there's no time to think. We have to set up our new life now in Hong Kong. We smuggled here, and so there was much more about it was much more about actions and not much time to be like, is this what I want? Is this making me happy? um, and then of course there's a shift in that mentality mindset because of the foundation that the older generation have set up for us, that we now were given the chance to have a higher education, like a longer education, and to be able to reach out to get into also all types of jobs. And of course, that's a whole other beast to handle. But that was the foundation that was set up for the next generation. So then when it comes to my parents, my mom, her generation is much more about doing as well. I think they also had the world was a little bit less complicated too, as in, for example, in Hong Kong, at the time my mom went to college, but it was not common at the time. Like there was only 2 universities in Hong Kong at the time, whereas as of now, there's already like 10, 20 plus universities, like whether big or small. Um, so at the time when my mom was up and coming as a young adult, it was all about do as well. And even jobs itself wasn't that, there wasn't much choices. Like, and when people go in, they kind of just stay in the job. Whereas, as I'm sure you know now, with our generation, it's not uncommon for people to switch into a new job every year, every 2 years. Um, so my point is like, I think what the past generation has set up for us to now also be able to think about, have the privilege to think about, like, what makes me happy? What gives me a purpose in life? And what if I have identified it? How do I go around it? How do I go about it? So it gives us a path to be able to actually think about, the decisions or which way to go. Is there a righter or wronger way to go about it? And we are at a time where almost the opportunities are infinite, and there are many ways to go around it. Whereas before it's much more simplistic and straightforward. So I think that's why we're also at a time where we could get bogged down by rejections or things that don't go with our expectation. But it's so that's why the topic itself in our generation has also become more prominent. It's raising more awareness. So, and I do believe it is very important to do so, rather than just shoving it in the corner and thinking, oh, you're weak. You should just keep working, right? But I think we are living in different times. Like it's not exactly just about do anymore, because there are many ways to go around it. And so by uh, enabling this conversation, I also believe it is good for society for all of us to learn to open up and not be ashamed of it, at least. Like even with my friend, I believe there's a bit of shame and guilt amongst his family. That's why that's why they weren't able to openly talk about. If anything, they all each feel guilty of what happened. And so I think that's why amongst family, it is a bit trickier. But so say, for example, my friend was able to learn from a therapist to understand better, like to the importance of opening up.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Um, one other aspect that actually I was thinking about throughout the movie was the kind of support that a child whose parent is suffering from mental illness might require. Because oftentimes, when we're talking about a generation who might have never accessed mental health services, you know.
Mm,
So for a child who has lived through a household wherein mental health
yes.
actually is not prioritized, so can we provide that kind of space for them? Can we actually offer that kind of support system for such for people, in general? And a lot of times we don't even realize if our parents are suffering from mental illness because that's not a conversation that we often have, especially in Asia. So
Mm.
I wanted to ask, like, what's in Hong Kong? Do you think like there are ample avenues for children whose parents have suffered from mental illness?
Mm-mm. I think it could be tricky when it comes to situations like this, when the person who's experiencing all the instability is the child. Obviously, like that was something I wanted to portray as well in Daffodil, that Mia is going through it as a child. And as a child, sometimes you just don't understand what's going on. You just know there's this like fluctuation amongst in your mom, but you don't fully understand why it is, or even know to have a comparison on what a normal mom should be, um, or what a healthy mom and daughter or family relationship should be. So it's often, I think it's often tricky for a child to even identify it, right? But I think so. So I think, with support and help in Hong Kong, they can't just knock on someone's door and make sure, hey, is the kid okay? But more so to just wait for the person who's in need, such as the adult, the mom, to come forth and ask for help. But I think it's probably almost impossible unless maybe the child experienced like abuse, like the teacher could see physical damage, scars, bruises, whatever. Then that could be something that raises the teacher's awareness, and maybe the teacher could then bring forth the situation. So that could be a linkage to helping the child if there's actual physical like evidence. But if there isn't, if it's just verbal abuse, sometimes it's hard to tell. But I do think sometimes their reactions or behavior could be seen in school. Maybe just on top of my head, maybe this kid suddenly became more recluse over the last few months when he wasn't like that at the beginning of the school year. So that's something maybe a teacher could help observe and maybe bring it up to a counselor at the school if there's a counselor for these type of things at a school, or bring it up to a social worker. But I think oftentimes they have to have physical evidence to prove that this is someone in need of help.
Hmm.
But I personally know in Hong Kong, it's quite a stressful and condensed city life, that even when it comes to education, it's very much about how many A's did you have, how many, let's make sure you don't have too many B's because that's going to pull down your whole average. So there's a lot of pressure since a young age, like I'm talking about primary one even, for kids to actually achieve certain grades. And when the sole goal, when the only goal at school is to achieve these points, it kind of loses the interest or curiosity in learning. Now it becomes just memorization, like over and over again. And as long as I memorize everything, I get my A, I move on. And then I forget all about what I learned. So I think education also has given a lot of pressure to Hong Kong kids. And I have heard many stories where the mom or parents would verbally abuse, so yell and screech at this kid, like just trying to discipline them, trying to get their ass into their seat to do their homework. And I think that's a lot of times how pressure gets built up, and even giving a child a wrong sense of what learning really means and what learning should be about, the point of it. So to me, that's always a bit of a shame in Hong Kong, but unfortunately, that's just how the education works when there's, you know, many people, many students that you need to cater to. That's somehow became the norm. But what's interesting to me is that, for example, in China, they've done this for a long time as well. But in recent years, they've also realized, like, look, we need to make some rules and policies so that we don't, so that kids can also have their outdoor activity time, not just tutoring session right after school for hours. And that's usually very common as well. I grew up with tutors as well too, just to get by. But hopefully with the conversation starting from the West about mental health and mental well-being, I already see this conversation going into Asia as well. So we could only just hope for the best, and that maybe changes won't won't happen overnight, but definitely over time and over generation. I'm sure if our generation, if you are a father, you probably have something you've learned from the past, and you hope to give something new or different to your child. So hopefully this is how change gradually becomes.
Yeah, yeah, I do hope so.
Mm,
Very much so, especially in India, and other
mm,
Asian countries, because
sure,
it's almost a similar situation.
exactly, yes. The Asian education tends to be a certain way, huh?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. My last question to you, Nicola, is that, like, how was this film received by you? Sorry, by your community, by the people around you? Yeah,
Mm. Um, I'll bring up anyway, I'll just tell you everything. I have to say, it happened in 2020, like as in I just finished the piece like at the end of 2019. I had big hopes for 2020, hoping that it'll get into like all sorts of festivals and that I could travel to it. But all of a sudden, global pandemic and a lot of the festivals were either canceled or postponed, or they gave me back the refunds for my submission. So there was a bit of a chaotic moments during that year. Like no one knew what to do as a festival, right? So unfortunately, I wasn't able to travel as I hoped to, because that's usually the best way to showcase your work and for people to, interact with you and learn more about you in person as well. So I felt I did lose out on the in-person element in it, but it did get into a few festivals I'm very proud of. It's just unfortunate I couldn't go there to really make the most out of it. But some of the more proud moments I had with this piece is I got into Vancouver Asian Film Festival, and it won a few awards in other festivals. And now it's also streaming in a streaming platform called IndieFlix, which is a pretty amazing platform that also benefits the filmmaker. Like every minute that's watched in that streaming platform, I get some return as well. So it's a very healthy kind of work way of working that supports not just the streaming platform, but also the filmmaker. So that was my first time for my short film to be put up, to be considered onto a streaming platform, that to a point where I'm actually not, I mean, I'm not making big money from it, but at least there's something that comes back, because I've also been told many, many years that if I make a short film, don't expect anything in return. And I didn't for a long time, but this piece was actually the first that, hey, could get me something back a little bit. uh, but ultimately it is still about making your next project. So I definitely learned a lot from making this piece. This was something I also really poured my heart and soul and savings into it. But I'm also very grateful for the people I got to work with who really believed in not just me, but also believed in the importance of a creative outlet besides always working on corporate gigs. So all the people that was in my credits, we all are freelancers in Hong Kong in film in one way or another, whether it be cinematographer or music or animation. But all of them truly gave me their time as well, and their itch to do something creative. So we really bonded throughout this experience, and I think that was probably the biggest takeaway from me, the crew bonding and casting, actually.
Thank you for sharing that, Nicola. And I wish you all the best with your film.
Thank you, and thank you so much for having me. It really was an honor when you guys approached me. It's exactly the type of company or entity that I would love to associate this film with, because that was ultimately my goal, my intention to visualize the mind space in order to talk about mental well-being, mental health. And I'm glad I hope this resonates with you too. And thank you. Just thank you for having me.
Yeah, yeah. Anugraha, who has been associated with Belongg, wishes to say something. Anugraha.
Yeah, I was just thinking, like, while I was watching the movie as well, I was hearing Nicola talk. One thing I was thinking about was that there's a little conversation around this, but about caregiving, right? Usually it shocks the other person. It's like a stress on their resources, and what inevitably happens is that they fall short of their responsibility and they end up feeling guilty. So there is this conversation around all of us being somewhat trained from a young age to expect to play the caregiver's role, to have some sort of skill set to be able to help the person next to us if they do have some like psychological or even physical needs. So yeah, that's something I was thinking about. Like the child, for example, is in the movie, the child was the pre-guilt part of the person, right? And that was the only part of the person that was able to help her through grieving. And the teenage part of her, which was very guilt-ridden, is not able to help. So yeah, I was thinking about how, like, if we were all more well-equipped to take up the caregiver role and not be so shocked if it fell upon us, then yeah, I think we'd all be like much better support systems for each other. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I think, yeah, in general, like especially amongst Asian families, we tend to hide things from each other. It's not so open book. So that's why it's easy to overlook what's really happening even within the same household.
Yeah. Thank you, Nicola, for being with us today. And I know it's quite late in Hong
Oh,
Kong.
it's fine. No worries. But I appreciate this opportunity, truly. And I hope the audience gets something out of it, or at least resonates with them.
Yeah, I do hope so. And I'm hoping that like many people, communities, groups in India to take notice of the film and also like, engages with the film again and again, perhaps this year, in the coming years as well, because the relevance never dies down. So yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
And I would love to keep in touch.
Me too. All right, Nicola.
All right. Have a good night.
You too. Bye.
Bye.